Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics. My name's Ben, and on this podcast we're going to be looking at every single one of the Disney animated classics to see if they're worthy of making the list of Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics? Why Waly Gisnep? Well, if you look at Walt Disney's signature, which if you've watched any of these films you'll have been forced to sit through at the start, you'll see that it doesn't really look like it says Walt Disney, it looks like it says Waly Gisnep. Joining me today is Liam. Liam, we've chosen Waly Gisnep for that reason. Why have we chosen Animated Classics?
Well, Ben, the Walt Disney Animated Classics as a brand carries a certain prestige with it. However, all that really refers to is any animated feature produced by the Walt Disney Animated Studios, the one currently based in Burbank. And as we're going to see, a lot of these films don't really hold up to the mantle of being an animated classic. So we're making our own list of animated classics, albeit a knockoff list of Waly Gisnep animated classics.
So what better place to start than back in 1937, the first full-length animated feature film, Snow White. Liam, going into Snow White, what was your memory of the film?
So before watching this, my memory of the film was never really liking Snow White that much.
Is that because it's old and boring?
It's because it's old and boring. Though, I rewatched it this morning, and I've got to admit, it's not as old and boring as I remember. But I do still have my problems with it.
So before getting into sort of analysis, let's just go through a kind of blow-by-blow of the film. It's basically got 10 characters in, and 7 of them are dwarves, is my memory of it.
I'm going to say 11, actually.
Oh, there's the Huntsman.
12, then, because I think in your count you missed out my favourite character of the movie.
Which is?
In the opening scene, we have the evil queen talking to her magic mirror. And I think that even to this day, it's one of my favourite pieces of animation that Disney have produced. It looks great.
It does, yeah. One thing I'll say about it is, as a magic mirror, I think it's nailed the magic section. In terms of the mirror section, I think it's failing because you can't see any of her face in that mirror.
No, it's not even a mirror at all now I think about it. It's a magic piece of glass.
I mean, Magic Commedia dell'arte mask is less catchy, for sure. And while we're working on titles, the evil queen, again, she's a queen, she's evil, but it's much like the character of Scar in The Lion King. Were they called that before they developed that trait, or are they called that because they developed that trait? Because if she was christened Evil Queen, it's a foregone conclusion.
I'm going to assume that it's a moniker given to her by her subjects. Whether or not she embraces it, I don't think anyone actually talks to the Queen in the film. Oh, the mirror does. On the subject of the mirror, he never answers questions directly, and that's quite irritating. The first question that the Queen actually asks the mirror is, magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And when it says it's not you, she then asks for the name, and instead of giving her the name Snow White, he just gives her a description of her.
Yeah, it's basically sort of process of elimination. And it has the Black Cauldron effect of, you get told there is a kingdom, but you never see it, right? As you say, there's 12 characters in the film. Wait, 13? 12. 12 including the mirror. So you take the queen out and the mirror out of the equation, there's 10 people. Now 7 of them are dwarves, one of them doesn't live there, one of them's the Huntsman. So, although she didn't get Snow White's name, it's pretty quick to go, well, it's either the Huntsman or that woman.
One thing I found quite interesting about the Queen, so she's vain enough that every single day she asks the mirror, who is the fairest in my kingdom of 12 people, including you, a mirror. And every day it says, it's you, until one day it goes, no, it's Snow White. And I'm like, what happened overnight?
I imagine it wasn't a sudden change, right? It wasn't that she got her hair done or whatever. I think it was, Snow White was gradually moving in that direction. You'd see loads and loads of days where it'd be like, oh, it's you and no one else is even close. Then it's you, but there's this other person. And like, oh, it's a bit of a close run thing. And then that was the day. It's like the Malcolm Gladwell tipping point. That Snow White had put her 10,000 hours in. I'm conflating two Malcolm Gladwell theories there, but we're fine.
It just reminds me of, when they say if you take a picture of someone every day, and you take 2 pictures side by side, and you won't see the difference, but then you can take 2 pictures, say, a year apart, and they look completely different, but you never see the gradual change.
Yes.
The mirror is able to see those gradual changes. One day it's just like, yeah, it's her.
So the mirror is basically a sort of fantasy version of boring blog projects. After the Queen, then, obviously we have the Huntsman, who, to my memory, doesn't do anything. And then Snow White runs off into the forest, and it's a bit scary.
I've got a note about this, which is that it is equal parts terrifying and hilarious.
Do you think that's what they were going for? Look, we're nailing the terrifying, but we need a bit more hilarity in this scene.
It is terrifying. I remember as a child being very creeped out by it. The imagery is very overbearing. It is very scary. The problem is there is nothing in that forest that can hurt her, and she is just overreacting the whole time.
I mean, as far as we know, this is the first time she's not only been in that forest, but been in any forest.
So it's just her reaction to trees.
Yes, she may be like, oh my god, they're 10 feet tall and made of brown.
So I actually have a bit of a personal gripe with this scene as well. And I can assure you this isn't going to be the last time that this topic comes up. But there is a moment in one of the many, many Kingdom Hearts games where you have to escort Snow White through the woods. And it's a big open clearing with 3 scary trees in it. And as with all escort missions, she just makes a beeline for each of the trees.
Watching that sequence, I can't think of anything worse than trying to escort. Like, I just imagine you patiently plodding along a path and her just screaming and running in circles.
Weirdly enough, that is exactly what it is like. And the worst part is this is the opening of the game. It's one of the first things you do. Like, the first world you end up in is the Snow White world. You're dropped into the forest, and it's like, protect Snow White from the trees that are stationary in a big open clearing, and she just has to run towards them.
Much like the Kingdom Hearts games, I feel the film Snow White and the Seven Dwarves fundamentally doesn't know what's good about it. So we get to the dwarves, and they immediately... No, actually, before we get to that point, we need to talk about the economy of the dwarves, because they are 7 people who, every day, they go down a mine to get incredibly valuable gems, which they just seem to put in a bin somewhere, and then they live in a hovel, and that's it.
So, at the end of the dwarves' working day, there is a door labelled Vault, and they just throw bags of gems in there. And yet, I have no idea what they're doing with these gems. Are they getting them for the Queen? No one ever seems to come pick them up.
I mean, there's so many questions. Like, so my first question is it the idea that people with sort of dwarvism, i.e. they're people who are just, they're human beings but they're small, or are they the mythical dwarves as in dwarves and elves? Secondly, how did they come together? Are they a commune? Are they related? What are they?
When Snow White barges into their home, without having been invited, she sees a very, very dirty house that looks like it has not been lived in, and she assumes that there are 7 very untidy children currently living there.
Yes.
Not dead, despite the fact that it looks completely abandoned. She assumes that there are just 7 very untidy children. So that makes me think that the mythical dwarves do not exist in this world. Because if mythical dwarves, halflings, these types of creatures lived in this world, my reaction upon seeing a dwarf-sized house would be, oh look, dwarves live there, not this is where a group of orphan children live, which is what her assumption is.
To be fair though, Liam, if you see a tree, you don't run shitting yourself. So...
I suppose she's not had the same exposure.
No, but it would be a much darker film if she walked in immediately gone, our 7 children must have died here.
That's not even my favourite part about that scene. So she walks in, she is very, very patronising at this small house and is constantly insulting these children for being very, very messy. Then she looks at the table and there is a pickaxe wedged into the table and she just laughs. So she assumes these are children who are just playing with pickaxes.
There's not a lot of explanation. One we can go with, she's gone, glad to see that wood's finally getting its comeuppance. 2, she may just have a delirious joy for pickaxes. So the dwarves come home and in what can only be described as the gender politics of 1937, Snow White just goes, guess I'm just going to clean up after the men.
Can we talk about the cleaning up, please?
We can talk about the cleaning up.
Not just because this is her assumption. Well, actually, they set it up quite well because she has been forced to work as a scullery maid by her stepmother. So cleaning is what she just
Wait,
does
do we
day.
see that, or does she say that?
I believe it's in the opening storybook. It says that the queen was so fearful of her beauty that she dressed her in rags and forced her to work as a scullery maid.
Wait, so she's related to the queen?
Queen is her stepmother, I believe.
I honestly can't remember. I only am questioning it because what I'm trying to say is, why does the queen even care if Snow White's prettier than her? They're just trying to impress the Huntsman.
The only other eligible man in the kingdom.
Because frankly, the queen could just go, so what if Snow White's fairer than me? I'm the queen, you can be the king. I pay you.
I suppose it's vanity, but yeah, the plot and the motivations of these characters is very, very thin.
That's not going to stop me overanalyzing them, though. So, sorry, you were saying about the cleaning scene.
The cleaning scene might be the most disgusting thing that Disney has ever put to animation.
And this is a studio member that gave us Gurgi.
Okay, maybe the second most disgusting thing put to animation.
Why is it so disgusting?
It's the animals. So their first approach to cleaning is just to lick the plates clean, which, to be fair, she just chastised them for. She's like, no, put them in the sink. But they're still wiping them clean with their tails, which is basically just their butt.
Sure, some people might be a bit hoity-toity and be like, I don't want dried animal feces on my plates. But, the dwarves aren't used to the finer things in life, and apparently neither Snow White.
One thing that has just came to mind is Disney themselves do make light of this. If you've ever seen Enchanted.
Yes.
Which, if you've not seen, by the way, I definitely recommend. It's from the era... Well, Disney is very much now in the camp of meta-commentary on its own works. Like, a lot of their remakes are trying to address things that people had problems with. And obviously that would be a big one, that, these animals are just wiping themselves all over the furniture and the plates. And helping bake a pie at one point, which I'm like, that's not okay.
Do we see what's in the pie? Because it could be animal in the pie.
All the birds just helping make a venison pie.
We never liked Tim anyway, tweet.
I'll have to have a look to see which animals are missing from that scene.
Okay, so they clean up, and then, to my memory, basically nothing happens for a while, and she sort of vaguely teaches the dwarves to just be less meh.
Yeah, so the dwarves head home and are shocked that their house is clean and the fire is on and there is food cooking, so they assume a monster has done this. It's a strange world that monsters can exist that would clean and prepare food for you. So they figure out that whatever this monster is, it's upstairs in their bed, and they send, of all people, they send Dopey to check it out. They're quite cruel to Dopey. In fact, before we go any further, can you remember the Seven Dwarves?
Okay, so we've got Dopey, we have Doc, we have Sneezy, we have Dopey.
We've had Dopey.
Doc, Dopey, Sleepy, Sleepy, Sneezy, Grumpy, Bashful, and Happy?
Yep, you've actually got them all right, which is surprising because there's pairs that I keep confusing. Often I will forget Bashful and Happy.
Now, just on the names of the dwarves, I immediately understand what 6 of their 7 personality traits are. Doc. Now, my sort of passive interpretation is it's some sort of affected title that he's referring to himself as a doctor. Am I missing something? Did they find him on the dock?
From the beds, it is DOC.
Yeah.
So...
It's just got a dockish quality to it.
There's actually a really good scene where... Oh, so first of all, the dwarves, they send Dopey up to see what is in the room. They decide it's a monster. Yes. They all go up fully intent on killing this monster. They go into the room with pickaxes, with clubs. They're over the bed. They see the lump in the bed, and they are ready to strike. And
that's the end of the film, isn't it?
Just hard cut to black. But then Doc pulls the sheet back, and they all stop because they're like, oh, look, it's a pretty girl. That's fine.
I don't know what you're wanting there, Liam. Were you wanting them to continue and go, yep, there's a pretty woman, still going to beat her to death?
But part of the point of the film is that beauty doesn't necessarily mean goodness. This is the whole point of the evil queen, is she's the most beautiful person until, April the 23rd of that year, when suddenly Snow White's the most beautiful. But she's still evil.
But no, the exact point is the opposite of that. And the point is, when you're beautiful, you're a nice person. And when you're not beautiful, you're not. Because Up until that point, she's been the most beautiful thing in the land, and she's not ordered any assassinations. But the second that changes, she wants Snow White dead. For all we know, Snow White's been on a killing spree up to that point because she wasn't the fairest. Maybe that's why she laughed at the pickaxe. She had fond memories.
When she wakes up and sees that there are 7 little men, as she responds, watching her, she laughs and then says, "I can name each of you just by looking at you," and then proceeds to identify them one by one. But Disney had the sense to have Happy introduce both himself and Dopey, so that he doesn't just have Snow White look at Dopey and say, "You're Dopey."
Yeah, because she's seen the names on the beds,
yes,
right?
She goes, "Oh yeah, sorry." She's not just pulling these names out of thin air.
And then they go, "Yeah, I guess I'm called Sneezy now because I sneezed that one time."
So she goes upstairs, she sees the names on the bed, finds it quite cute, but it's like, what weird names for children, and then proceeds to, I think she pushes the beds together, unless the dwarves have pushed the beds together previously, and then sleeps across all of them.
She deals with being woken up by 7 people standing over her very well. Even if you say they definitely have no malintent, just someone watching you sleep is creepy, but 7 people silently agreeing to do it simultaneously is just weird.
Whilst also holding pickaxes in clubs.
We always do this. It's your turn.
So after they've decided not to kill this girl because she's pretty, we sort of start this second act of the film, which, I'm going to be quite frank, is incredibly boring.
To my recollection, practically nothing happens in it.
I believe the only thing that happens in it is they have a little song and dance where the dwarves perform for Snow White, and then as soon as they're done, they say, "Now you do something."
Which is slightly menacing when you think about it.
But then her response is to sing "One Day My Prince Will Come," which I think arguably is the worst Disney princess song.
Her voice is kind of incredible, and not in a good way. She's incredibly high-pitched, isn't she?
I wasn't sure when was the best time to get to this, but I quite like this film, it turns out. What I don't like is Snow White.
And why is that?
I do find her voice incredibly grating, and I know that it was very much the affect of the time, so I can't necessarily blame the voice actress. She was giving the performance that she was told to give, but it does not hold up to modern sensibilities. You listen to it and you're just like, this is very annoying.
You gotta do that, the high-pitched voice, that's what they want. I imagine that's how Walt Disney spoke. Whilst chewing a cigar.
It's interesting as well that she's the only princess that uses this affect. It died out before our next princess film, which was only a decade or so later.
That's true. It obviously was yet another casualty of World War II. The high-pitched princess character. So we can skip ahead then to one of the most memorable things about the film, which is, and a lot of people have horrified memories of the transformation scene of the evil queen. And coming back to her motivation of, I'm still as attractive as I was, there's now someone slightly more attractive than me, I'm going to make myself hideous. It's an odd plan.
Is it permanent?
Presumably not. Well, for her it is, because she dies about 10 minutes later, but presumably that's not the intention. It looks incredibly painful, though.
I quite like it as a thematic beat, if it is a permanent change, that she's so overcome with envy that she will warp the things she values most just to take out this person who is more attractive than her. But of course, I'm giving the film far more credit than it gave itself.
And it has that Brothers Grimm-esque quality. There's something sort of grotesque about it. I may be misremembering this, but I'm pretty sure the original Brothers Grimm version of Snow White, the way the evil queen dies is she's basically, her feet are like forged into red hot iron shoes, so she dances herself to death. They presumably cut that for time reasons or whatever.
That's proper Brothers Grimm nonsense, just shoehorned in at some point. We're like, yeah, it's just a weird idea, let's throw it in at the end.
Dances herself to death, yeah, that'll do. So she transforms herself and gives her the apple. Om nom nom, taste the apple.
I will say about the transformation scene, this is probably the earliest recorded example of ASMR. The whole potion scene is excellent.
That's incredibly weird.
You say that, but After we're done, you can go onto YouTube and search Evil Queen Potion ASMR, and someone will have done a roleplay of it.
I don't doubt it, and I'm sure there's a million Mirror Mirror ASMRs as well.
Another thing about the transformation I really love is from the moment she transforms, I think until the moment she dies, she seems to be cackling constantly.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, yeah. Is that a deliberate affectation or a side effect of the potion?
I think an old hag's cackle was one element of the potion, but I didn't assume it would be a permanent old hag's cackle.
I mean, they very much are conflating every evil female character from fairy tales here, because she's a queen, and she's a stepmother, and she's a witch, and she's an old woman, which is just inherently evil, apparently. They're taking it all.
This was a big gamble for Disney, and they were like, we might only get the chance to do one animated feature. Let's shove it all in there.
Let's get both ends of the sexist spectrum. Let's have all the negative things about older women and also suggest younger women just exist to clean and dance.
On the subject of sexism, I have a note here which just says, Grumpy could be renamed misogyny.
All I'm going to say is men's rights activists, they like hanging around with other angry white men.
It's interesting you say men's rights activists, because I have a quote here which is, she's a female and all females is poison. They're full of wicked wiles. And then when another dwarf questions what are wicked wiles, he says, I don't know, but I don't like it. I'm assuming that Grumpy has been visiting certain subreddits and is just parroting things he has been told about women.
I thought you were going to say he's been visiting certain brothels. And they're just like, you're not coming in, you know, we're going to send you away with our wicked wiles. And he's like, I don't know what those are, but I don't want to tell the other dwarfs I got turned away at the brothel.
The weird thing is he's not grumpy. He is just a misogynist. Everything he says is women are terrible.
That's kind of incredible. And I know we've already talked about the dwarfs, but I just have one more thing. Is Dopey a different age?
He looks younger. He's the only one without a big beard.
Yeah. And is that a stylistic choice? Is he just shaving it to stand out? Can he not grow one? Has he been taken in by 6 older men and forced to be the monster? He's basically the canary in the mine for monsters. Okay, let's cut ahead to Snow White eats the apple.
She eats the apple, and there is actually a problem in the Evil Queen's plan. She reads the book, and she's like, oh wait, love's first kiss can awaken them. And she says, that's okay, the dwarves will think she's dead, and she'll be buried alive, so no one will get to kiss her. My problem is the dwarves do think she's dead, and they decide to bury her in a glass coffin like Lenin.
Well, we've already established they have a weird thing about just watching motionless women, but like Lenin.
It is. It's a perfect replica of Lenin's, what's the word? Is it mausoleum?
Yes, yeah. And then presumably Grumpy's going to take over. He's going to ruin the intent of what Snow White was trying to start, and then there'll be some purges of peasants, etc. It's either that or, to my memory, I've not seen Lenin's corpse, but I assume he's embalmed or whatever.
Yes.
There's no implication that's done here because, you can't embalm someone without removing their organs. So, was their plan just go, well, she is dead, but it'd be great to watch her decompose?
I assume so. They've not thought this through. And also, there is a little storybook segment at this point that says they thought she was so beautiful they couldn't think to bury her, so they put her in a glass coffin. And then it just hard cuts to the prince wanted to find this presumed corpse and kiss her. It seems to suggest that he knows she's asleep, but it never gives any reasoning for that.
We have to assume that's the case, because if not, obviously it's a fairy tale and it's got weird elements to it, but you kind of have to assume that, right? Otherwise it's just like, you say there's a hot corpse. Well, I'm there.
And they've not embalmed her, so we've only got a few days.
Do we get a time frame on this?
The time frame is Dopey's beard. Dopey has yet to grow a beard by this point.
I always conflate it with Sleeping Beauty, where
Yes.
you get quite a specific time frame on that. Or like Beauty and the Beast, where well, that's up for debate, but they say it's about 10 years, don't they? Whereas here, it could be a case of days, it could be a case of years, I guess.
It was long enough to construct a glass coffin and get the word out. You can come look at this beautiful woman in a glass coffin.
I'm surprised the Huntsman wasn't there, to be honest. Have we skipped over the demise of the evil queen?
Oh, we have. She gets chased off a cliff by the dwarves.
Well, to my memory, she gets chased by the dwarves, whose plan is presumably some kind of lynching.
They chase her with their pickaxes and clubs. That's their approach to killing things.
That's their approach to everything, really, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, they maul Dopey at one point. He gets caught up in some pots and pans. They think he's a monster, and they just wail on him.
I think they knew it was Dopey. I think they just wanted an excuse. So, the rock she's on gets hit by lightning and collapses, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she gets chased up the cliff where she's like, I better run, these dwarves are going to maul me to death. And then she gets to the very top of the cliff, and then lightning strikes, and she falls off the cliff. So, essentially, the dwarves, who were filled with blood rage, they escaped this whole story with clean hands.
Well, this is it. It's what's known philosophically as an act of omission, is if you're going to kill someone, and whilst you're going to do it, they're in a fatal position that you don't save them from, morally, you could argue it's the same as you killing them, because you've gone in with the intent of killing them, and the same outcome has come, i.e. they are dead. So it does put a dampener on Dopey, the cheeky, lovable, cute character who would have been at least 1/7 responsible for the murder of a queen.
Well, no, it's like a firing squad. You have 7 of them, and no one knows who dealt the killing blow, so it's fine.
Can you do that with pickaxes? One of us has the sharp one, the others have 6 blunt pickaxes. Admittedly, you can still beat someone to death with a blunt pickaxe. So the prince comes and he kisses her. Her prince has come. She wakes up and she's, fine.
Yeah, she gets to ride off into the sunset with her prince. In fact, this film in general is where a lot of the Disney tropes began. Even ones like the animal companions. This one is full of them. She's just constantly with animals.
And it's weird because so many of these tropes, they don't really happen for quite a while. So you get the storybook opening, which is quite common, and some of the other bits and pieces. Like When You Wish Upon a Star is very similar to One Day My Prince Will Come and all that. Or is it Someday? Someday My Prince Will Come. Yeah. But a lot of the things so the princess trope and the villain trope, they're kind of absent from the next few films, really.
It's strange because obviously Disney as a brand is very tied to its princesses. But before 1989, they only had 3 princess films.
Exactly, and Cinderella's not till 55?
51, I think. So I was looking through the list in preparation for this, and I was like, wow, there are not a lot of princess films for a very long time.
Yeah, so for 15 years, basically, it's just Snow White, which is just surreal. And again, the other films like Dumbo and Pinocchio and kind of Bambi, they don't really have fixed villains. I know Bambi has the father, but it's not really characterised in the same way as the evil queen. They're just Pinocchio and Dumbo, everything is horrible in those worlds. But we'll get to that. Okay, so, and then the film basically just ends, right?
Yes. I've always appreciated this more as a historical artefact than as a piece of entertainment.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The achievement of it can't be understated, but that doesn't mean it's a good film. Now, I've been watching a lot of films from the 30s recently, and let me tell you, oh boy, filmmaking's come on a long way.
Well, I will say that there is a good film in here. As I said, I don't like Snow White. Actually, I want a proper Disney live-action remake where they can change the character of Snow White, because right now, I much prefer this film if you just cut Snow White entirely out of it.
So the film you'd prefer is basically The Huntsman and the Seven Dwarves?
Yes, I want a film that consists of a queen going, who's the fairest of them all? The mirror doesn't answer. It then shows a huntsman and then some 7 dwarves, and they chase an old hag off a cliff. I think that's a really snappy 45-minute movie.
And the fan edit will be coming soon.
So one final point I thought would be quite interesting if, as we're going through these films, we can identify what we think is the sexiest character in each of the films. So, Ben, what is your opinions on the sexiest character in Snow White and the Seven Dwarves?
I mean, for me, it's a toss-up between the mirror or the queen. I'm going to go for the queen because I like her attitude.
So I have a couple of notes here. The first note is just Prince looks wrong.
The prince in this film, not Prince the musician. I started complaining about 80s pop stars. Don't know where that came from.
So there's something about the prince, he doesn't look right, so I'm ruling him out. I think the dwarves are all too similar, and also just old men, so I don't really want to include those. I actually think it's a toss-up between the queen and the huntsman.
And okay, and what's going to break the tie for you there?
I think I'm actually going to go with the huntsman, because the huntsman stays a big burly man with a heart of gold throughout the whole film, whereas at one point the Queen does turn herself into a horrible hag, kills someone, and then dies.
So we're going with the Queen and the Huntsman, actually the sexiest characters, which maybe the Mirror knew, and maybe it was like, hey, I just don't like Snow White.
Because again, I think I get that Snow White's supposed to be fair. She's not particularly sexy, and her voice is incredibly grating. And also, she has this very vacant expression.
I mean, there's also one of the things that's aged very badly about this film is just the age of the character. Like,
yes.
She's basically a child, so yeah, we're gonna just not touch that. We'll see how we get on with the sexy discussion in future films where they're all animals, but that's we'll deal with that further down the line.
Okay then, Ben. We've talked it through. Snow White, Walt Disney's first animated classic. Does it deserve a place on Waly Gisnep's animated classics?
So we've got the Waly Gisnep parchment there, pristine, clean, and ready to have something added to it. No, I don't think Snow White gets to go on the list. I think it's just a bit too dated. I think what it represents as a film is very valuable. How it stands up as a piece of cinema itself, I don't think it's worthy of being an animated classic.
I have to agree. It's clearly a very important part of animated history. However, as a film in its own right, there's just not really enough here to earn it that title of an animated classic.
So what are we looking at next time?
Next is going to be the second film they released, which is Pinocchio, which is a personal favourite actually, so I'm quite looking forward to this one.
There's a lot of weird stuff to talk about in that, but I'm looking forward to it. I've already got a fan theory that's entirely cultivated by myself, but we'll come to that when we get to it. Liam, thank you so much for discussing Snow White with me.
You're very welcome, Matt. It's been a lot of fun.
Cool, and we'll join you next time for Pinocchio. Goodbye.